WNYC Studios is supported by Peacock, presenting Vigil. From the producers of Bodyguard comes the acclaimed British crime drama, where a murder investigation aboard a British nuclear submarine sets off an escalating mystery. Starring Saran Jones and streaming December 23rd. Go to peacocktv.com to sign up.
This week on The Experiment, Emma Green dives into the U.S. abortion debate with the story of one woman who thought she had a clear idea of what she believed until she got pregnant herself.
I was almost mad that I was going to have to choose life.
Listen wherever you get podcasts.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. The Queens Museum is in the midst of what it's calling Year of Uncertainty, which seems a very apt description of where many of us are, right, with the pandemic, our national politics. And they say even the Constitution, and obviously the Constitution, as the Supreme Court seems poised to overturn its own ruling in Roe versus Wade, and the other ways that they're changing the interpretation of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and you can keep going up. Did you know there are 27 amendments? The museum has invited several artists and residents to participate with works that engage various communities, works that bring together social issues, constitutional questions, and art. So we're joined now by two of those artists, Alex Strada and Tali Karen, whose multimedia and participatory artwork is focused on questions about the foundation of government, the U.S. Constitution. It's called Proposal for a 28th Amendment. Is it possible to amend an unequal system? Note the questions there, listeners. We're going to ask you to weigh in on both those two questions. Do you have a constitutional amendment to add, or is the Constitution salvageable based on inequality as it was? And they brought along one of the advisors when it comes to legal issues, Julia Hernandez, an associate professor of law at the CUNY School of Law. So welcome, Alex Strada, Tali Karen, and Julia Hernandez to WNYC. Hello.
Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for having us. Yes,
So-
it's great to be with you.
Alex and Tali, can you talk about this artwork first? You described it as multimedia, participatory, and incomplete. Why incomplete?
Yes, so thank you for asking that. It's something, as we were thinking about how to describe this project, one thing that really came to mind is the fact that it's incomplete. It's a participatory installation, as you mentioned, that critically examines the U.S. Constitution and asks visitors to reflect on questions, record themselves, and actually become part of a growing oral archive. So unlike a traditional artwork that might, ask for viewers to take in information, this work requires direct participation and engagement in order for it to function. So it is incomplete without people's participation, and it is also incomplete as it continues to grow and change and evolve over time.
And the work is predicated on the idea that it's an open question whether the Constitution written and ratified back in the 18th century is worth amending, or if we need to chuck it and start over. So CUNY law professor Julia Hernandez, maybe you could talk about that idea a little bit?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Brian. So there's certainly a lot of discussion about whether to, certainly in the last 10 years, whether to amend the Constitution, whether it's possible to sort of rewrite the entire thing from scratch. But with respect to amending the Constitution, there's two ways to amend the Constitution. Both are quite difficult. The first is with a 2/3 majority vote in the House and the Senate, followed by ratification of 3/4 of the states, which today is 38. And this is the process that all amendments have taken so far. There's an alternative process, which actually hasn't ever been utilized. And that's if requested by 2/3 of the state legislatures, Congress can call a constitutional convention for proposing amendments. And, there's been more than 11,000 amendments proposed to the Constitution, but only 27 have been ratified. So it's very difficult, and they require a supermajority across the country in order to succeed.
So, listeners, do you have a proposal for the next amendment to the Constitution? which would be the 28th. What's your idea for repairing the body politic by amending the Constitution? Or do you think it's time to start over with a constitutional convention or something else? Tweet at Brian Lehrer, if you can do it in 280 characters, or call in 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. And Alex and Tali, can you describe this artwork as a visitor to the Queens Museum would experience it? There are sonic soapboxes, for example, so maybe start with that. But what is this experience for a visitor to the Queens Museum?
Sure. So the installation currently occupies the atrium of the Queens Museum, and when you encounter the work, what you'd likely first notice are really large-scale, colorful banners that say the project's questions in the languages that are most commonly spoken in Flushing, so in Spanish, Bengali, Korean, Simplified Chinese, and in English. And beneath these colorful banners are the sonic soapbox sculptures that you mentioned. And these sculptures build upon the history of the soapbox as a kind of organizing tool, an object that people would stand upon in order to protest, to gather, to share their political beliefs. But we've tried to approach this object as a site of listening. So anyone who encounters these soapboxes are invited to put on headphones where they can listen to pre-recorded responses to the project's questions. And we've made a range of different kinds of soapboxes. So there's a two-person soapbox that's built for people to listen collectively or be in dialogue together. There's a soapbox that's fully ADA, wheelchair accessible, a daybed soapbox where you can lie down to listen and to dream, politically imagine. And there's a recording booth. So any visitor to the museum can also add to the oral archive and respond to the project's questions using the recording booth. And the last element of the installation that you'll encounter are visitors that line the walls of the videos that line the walls of the installation, which consists of different interviews that Tali and I have conducted with scholars from the CUNY Law School, Brooklyn Law School, and Columbia as they critically mark up and question the Constitution, kind of quite literally block it out or write notes in the margin, and unpack the document in regards to its structural racism, in regards to climate justice, labor, abolition, and also the difficulties of amending the Constitution, as Julia mentioned.
And Tali, if you want to weigh into this, and maybe Julia, I'll ask you too, as a law professor, why do you raise the question of just throwing out the Constitution and starting over rather than amending it? Like, in the context of politics as they exist in the United States, what do you think about the chances of ending up with something more inclusive if we started over, as opposed to, if, as Julia says, it would take a majority of state legislatures to vote to have a constitutional convention? We see where the majority of state legislatures are going these days.
Julia, should I start? I would say, for us as artists, this is exactly where we can ask these questions. Right, art is in many ways a place where you invite people to radically imagine the world we live in. So for us to stay within the question of what is possible or what is not possible might not be the same thing as it would be for a policymaker or for a lawyer. For us, it's really a question of bringing people together and trying, at this moment of crisis, really opening up, different possibilities, because many of the structures and worlds we inhabit are a result of people coming together and imagining first, and then often these things, are manifesting themselves in legal structures and in policy.
And Professor Hernandez, is there a country out there with a better constitution on paper? Better, if we define better as more progressive, more inclusive, more protective of democracy on the ground, at least on paper. We did at least amend our Constitution all these times. 13th Amendment, ban slavery. 14th Amendment, due process, equal protection. 15th Amendment, voting rights. We can cite others. So there's a history of amending it toward the more progressive in many cases, toward the more equal. Does any country have a better constitution?
Brian, many scholars and commentators look to South Africa's constitution. It was developed in the context of years of social political struggle. It guarantees specific socioeconomic rights that the United States Constitution does not guarantee, such as the right to housing, the right to health care, to reproductive decisions. It specifically bans torture, cruel and inhumane treatment, detention without trial. It specifies that the Constitutional Court has an expanded number, in comparison to the United States Supreme Court, an expanded number of justices, limited terms. But to answer your previous question also, I think the possibilities of either starting from scratch with the United States Constitution, rewriting the Constitution, or proposing further amendments really begins with being honest and clear-eyed about the origins of our particular document, and being honest about the fact that the Constitution was drafted and adopted in the context of the transatlantic slavery trade, conquest and colonization of peoples native to what is now the United States. And so, the DNA of this document holds many problems. And, just to sort of name a few, and there's many, the legitimization of slavery in the text of the document, in the interpretation of the document, the failure to guarantee universal voting rights, the failure to define citizenship, and of course, like you initially mentioned, and is certainly playing out today, the issue of the Supreme Court's power in interpreting constitutional rights has been a pervasive theme throughout our constitutional history.
Let's open up the soapbox and see what people would say if they were on one of these Queens Museum soapboxes. Let's start with Julian Hastings. Julie, you're on WNYC. Hi there. Get up on that soapbox, but just for a few seconds. How would you amend, or would you throw out the Constitution?
Oh, thank you, Brian. I wouldn't. Politics is the art of the possible. I'm not an artist. I'm an academician. Politics is the art of the possible, so I don't think it's going to happen. I hope many callers have called in about an amendment to overturn Citizens United. As you know, there's already a movement to get that amendment to make us no longer the outlier among advanced democracies, the only one that is so corrupted by big money, affecting everything from everything practically.
And I'm going to keep this short for now and move on to others, but overturn Citizens United for its corrupting influence with money in politics. Jay in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. You have a constitutional amendment of your mind, right?
Eliminate the Electoral College, plain and simple. Get rid of minority rule in this country.
Thank you very much. Robert in Atlantic Highlands, you're on WNYC, and you have a constitutional amendment. Hi, Robert.
Hi. My amendment is that I would like to see a quality of life index or happiness index, which other countries have, set with given parameters and separate from economics.
Thank you very much. Jean in Stamford, you're on WNYC. Hi, Jean.
Hi, I would like to have women as equal citizens of equal stature in the Constitution, and we have ratified the 28th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. In fact, it has been ratified. We have added it under Article 5 to the Constitution, and the only thing right now that's happening is that the executive branch is refusing to publish a new Constitution that includes the 28th Amendment. But we have, in fact, amended the United States Constitution with the 28th Amendment to make women equal citizens of equal stature under the Constitution of the United States.
Right, depending on how you count the timeline and all of that, the ERA. All right, John on Staten Island wants to go all the way. Hi, John, you're on WNYC.
I sure do, but Julie from the Queens Museum largely covered what I was going to say, and I thank her for that. The Constitution that we are now under is a defective document. It was designed to create a more perfect union Well, I think now, 125-ish years later, we need to scrap it and do a completely new Constitution, one that would include the 28th Amendment, certainly, one that would include an LGBT rights issue amendment, one that would scrap the Electoral College, which was racist in its design. Do I think that we can do a constitutional convention? Not under the present climate in this country, but I think it's what we need to do, and I would be happy to work with the Queen's Museum in that direction if they were in.
John, thank you very much. We're going to leave it there with callers on this, as we just have about 5 minutes left in the show and in the segment. So there's a smattering of what people think about how to change the Constitution or whether to start over, as we continue with Alex Strada and Tali Karen, whose multimedia and participatory artwork at the Queen's Museum is called Proposal for a 28th Amendment. Is it possible to amend an unequal system? And they are joined by Julia Hernandez, law professor at the CUNY Law School, who's been the constitutional advisor to this art project. Alex and Tali, how, for listeners wondering, how is this art exactly? Maybe talk a little bit about that for folks who might be more used to visiting the Met to see, paintings and sculptures and stuff like that.
Yes, that's a really good question. And, we're both also art teachers. So this is also a question that students ask all the time. What is art? And why, for example, why is a work like this art when many people might think of as art as sculpture or a painting? And as I try to also kind of touch on before, our idea is that art is very conceptual in the fact that it's a place for, community to come together and imagine, and kind of really think about the borderless ability of the imagination. And that is a place that in some ways museums can occupy, or artists can facilitate, we believe. So it's always a question of how to translate these ideas into form and shape. But at the core, it's bringing people together from different disciplines and really thinking through radical political possibilities and change. So for us, that's the way we think of art.
Tali or Alex, whoever wants to take it, we heard what we heard from the callers. I wonder if any of those reflect a most common or most common few that you're getting by participants at the Queen's Museum on the soapboxes that you've set up there, or if there are others.
Yeah, thank you everyone for calling in. We've had a lot of people propose abolishing the Electoral College. I think that might be one of the more common proposals. We also have had a lot of people propose throwing it out and starting over. In addition to kind of holding in addition to having the installation, we're also holding a number of different workshops with law professors to activate the installation. And we had one with the Queen's Teens, a group of teen activist artists affiliated with the Queen's Museum, where we collaborated with CUNY Law professor Carissa Keogh-Smith. And one of the teens in the workshop has this really wonderful recording where she talks about how the Constitution is like spilt milk, it's spoiled. So we found that in general, younger people really want to reimagine something entirely different, and but a commonplace 28th Amendment is to abolish the Electoral College.
And Professor Hernandez, I guess the one that I've thought about, I've mentioned on the air before, which is not something I'm proposing, it's just something that's popped in my head when we talk about education inequality on this show, which we do a lot. And I thought of a constitutional amendment to ban education funding based on property taxes, which is a national pattern, of course, that kind of funding base, and it almost guarantees unequal education funding by the income of the children's parents. So maybe a constitutional amendment to ban funding of education based on property taxes. That's my contribution to this project for what it's worth. But it sounds like really that's small potatoes compared to what you think about and what the participants are thinking about. So you want to give us a last thought in 30 seconds?
Sure, Brian. I think that's an amendment that I've thought about also, and I think that the proposal for an amendment to abolish the Electoral College is really a great one, and I think the history there is also really important in terms of the Electoral College formula having been derived from the 3/5 clause or compromise. When the delegates to the Constitutional Convention were drafting the convention and trying to think about whether enslaved people would be represented. And so we can see sort of the carryover from that, really unequal and racist system to the electoral college we have today. Or
redesign the Senate, which maybe goes the next step from the Electoral College, talk about unequal representation. But we thank Alex Strada and Tali Karen, artists, and CUNY law professor Julia Hernandez. Proposal for a 28th Amendment, Is It Possible to Amend an Unequal System, is on view through February 13th at the Queens Museum. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Brian.
you so much, Brian.